Hello everyone, this is Geo-Rant 160. It is March 31st, 2022. I'm making this video today instead of tomorrow because I like a good April Fool's joke as much as anyone else does, but not when I'm talking professionally. So we're doing it before so people don't think this is one, and it's not. What am I going to talk about today? I'm going to talk a little bit about definitions. Many of you know that in science we use terms differently than in lay speak, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about within our professions even. We will disagree on definitions. Like me as a Precambrian guy, I have a completely different definition of a greenstone belt than the guys who study the West Coast and the Phanerozoic of North America. They include things in greenstone belts that I would be like, and most Precambrian geologists would be like, no, you need to change that definition. But anyway, I digress. In science, unlike philosophy, which entertains any idea anyone crafts out of their head, and I've literally seen people argue about definitions for years before they can even get started. And that's counterproductive. It doesn't help anybody, so this isn't a slippery slope argument. This happens in the real world. So in science, the only time we will get together and form a community within our group, committee within our group to sit there and define something is when no one agrees. We don't mind a little disagreement here and there, but when no one can agree, then we have a problem, because in science, it needs to progress. In order to progress, we need to be able to talk about things. And if we can't agree on a definition, we can't talk about things. And people will just argue and wrangle indefinitely about that, because as human beings, we do that for some weird reason. Anyway, most of you may be familiar with the IAU's 2006 redefinition of a planet, and it's not just they decided to kick Pluto out of the planetary box. That's not what the definition is. Go look it up. I'm not going to, reiterate it here for you. But they basically got together and defined what a planet is. It has to meet certain criteria. Pluto didn't meet it. It got knocked out. It's not that big of a deal, man. I mean, they're the professionals. They're the ones writing the papers. They're the ones studying these things. So you can have an opinion about not being upset that Pluto's not a planet anymore, but you never looked at it or studied it. Your opinion really doesn't matter. I mean, it sounds mean, but it's true because you don't study it. And, I've accepted their definition. It doesn't matter to me. And you might be like, well, they could have just redefined it a different way. And then we end up with 100 planets. And people are like, well, I wouldn't mind having 100 planets. Then some other guy would sit there and say, well, maybe this is a planet. And he has 3,000. And now these two guys are butting heads and everyone's in a mess again. And then nothing progresses. And this happens all the time. Something else a little more obscure that most people aren't familiar with within geology was in the 1980s, a bunch of people got together, a bunch of geologists in North America, and came up with a North American stratigraphic code. This locked in how we formalize geologic units and strata. Because before that, we had people just doing whatever they wanted. And it also pissed off a lot of people. Now, not a lot of lay people because they aren't even aware of it, but it pissed off a lot of geologists. There's still some old timers out there. This is like early 80s. I forget the exact year of the first code. It was redone in 2005. But there are guys that predate the code that just will not accept it. They're old now and they don't really do much, so they don't really have the influence that they used to, but they are still there. Most of us accept it now, although most geologists don't really know how to apply it, because it is a long document. It's not like the Pluto thing where it's like a page or so. I mean, I think the document is 30 pages, something like that. And recently, I formed a committee to define what a continent is from a geologic standpoint, because I was noticing that I would talk about continents, supercontinents, continental fragments, paleocontinents, all these things, and some guy would just randomly come in and be like, what about Central America? That's a continent. You're like, Central America is not a continent, dude. They'd be like, yeah, it is. And then you find out that they're a sociology major, or an economics major. And it's just like, well, you guys really don't get to define what a continent is, because a continent is a physical thing. Most of us, when we hear continent, we think North America, we think Asia. We don't think socioeconomics of a human constructed concept in a certain region. I know everyone wants their little region to be special. I get that. I have my feelings about that too with the UP, but that doesn't change reality. So We got together, formed this thing last year. We got together, and the next couple of days it's going to be officially released, defining, locking down for geo-earth science purposes what a continent actually means. As a side effect, we had to define things not as strictly and rigidly as we did continent, but we had to still define things so you know what we were talking about. So supercontinent, megacontinent, continental fragment, paleocontinent, those kind of things appear in there as well. There's not as stringently defined because that wasn't the scope. And then it ends with actually delineating North America as a physical entity as it presently stands. Now, continents can change over time, and they do. We all know that, and that's fine. And when we get into the past, it gets harder to talk about those things, and that's fine. But the point was to define what a physical continent is right now. And, so I don't mean to, upset anybody, but it is what it is. And I'm going to tell you the results of it. Like the Pluto thing, there's one thing in there that's probably going to piss somebody off. When we do this, we try to take the traditional general concept definition and build on that. But we can't stick to that because in order to make a rigid definition, things get kicked out the box or things get brought in that shouldn't, that were never thought of before. It happens. But that's the price we pay. We just got to get over that. In this thing here, there are 7 continents. And you might be like, oh, Steve, Europe and Asia are one continent, Eurasia. And that is true. But we could not get this to go away. So we just accepted it without sitting there and more rigidly, strictly, nitpickingly, just keep that so we could fit the square peg into the round hole. We didn't want to infinitely go down a rabbit hole. Greenland has become a continent in this. It's North America, South America, Eurasia, Australia, Africa, Antarctica, and Greenland. It's a side effect. And I guess it is what it is, and we'll just have to accept it. So, things like that happen too. And to me, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's fine. I don't mind having Greenland on this continent. But it does kill Zealandia. Because that's another reason why this whole thing got started. I don't know how many of you know about Zealandia, but a bunch of, ocean guys and geologists saw a bunch of felsic crust on the ocean floor near New Zealand and said, oh, we got another continent here because it takes up a large chunk of the ocean floor. Well, when we think of continents, it doesn't fit the definition at all. And we very easily knocked it out. I mean, you start reading the first 2 sentences of what we define a continent as, and Zealandia is gone. And it's just for Earth, by the way. We didn't do other planets because Earth has ocean basins and plate tectonics and bimodal distribution of land. It's the only one that does. Venus has unimodal, Mars has trimodal. So anyway, rants for other times. This is getting long. Anyway, that's it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave below, and I hope you learned something.